Guys, the channel is called The Layman. Recently, I attempted to interact with Genetically Modified Skeptic, and so please leave me a link if you're familiar with Genetically Modified Skeptic. I couldn't find any actual critiques of religion, which may mean that I only did a cursory introduction to what he has to present. I heard a lot of, he used to belong to this cult that had a lot to do with essential oils, and he has a lot of bad things to say about cults, and that may have informed his decision to be super skeptical. But I'm trying to speedball this thing. Speedball is probably going to get this demonetized immediately. We're interacting with Dan McElwain right now. Why people claim the Bible has no contradictions. I don't necessarily claim that, but let's see what Dan has to say. What's up, Dan? Let's hear it.
When people on the internet assert that there are zero contradictions in the Bible, they're not asserting something they know to be a fact. What they're doing is performing belief that it's possible that there are no contradictions in the Bible. They've just never thought critically about what they're doing. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McElwain. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. And the first reason that they're just performing belief is because the notion that there are zero contradictions in the Bible is a dogma. And it is something that functions as costly signaling. It's a way to put on display to others that you are willing to endorse the credences it is necessary to endorse in order to have good standing within the social identities that are important to them.
I like the way that this guy talks. I think what he just said was extremely clear. So he is climbing my ranking list among YouTube atheists, that's for sure.
And they put it on display in public in order to incur increased costs, to invite increased scrutiny, in order to show that they're willing to amplify the costs of endorsing that credence, precisely because it's such an extraordinary claim. Just like saying the earth is only 6,000 years old, or all humanity descended from 8 people who survived a global flood around 4,000 years ago. These invite increased scrutiny and criticism from the public, and that is a way to incur costs.
It doesn't really invite that much scrutiny from the public because 90% of the public are Christian. So maybe he's saying that this invites scrutiny from historians, the sciences, but it doesn't really invite that much scrutiny from those communities either because they understand that, look, this is religious dogma, just like he said before. So I don't think that religious groups have been properly scrutinized for these things.
In a public way that can be seen by other members of the social identities that are important to you and thereby enhance your standing. So the main reason that they're not asserting something they know to be a fact is because it's not a fact. It's just a credence that they have decided to accept and assert in order to curate their social standing within the social identities that are important to them. And you can be upset about it all you want, but it is identity politics all the way down.
Interesting.
And the other reason they're not asserting something they know to be a fact is because virtually none of the people who make that assertion have competently interrogated all the nooks and crannies of the arguments regarding.
See, I think that that's an assertion too, right? How do you know? And I know that he's competent in his own right. He has several degrees, but I mean, I think it would be egocentrically rational for him to accept the idea that there are Christian scholars with more degrees than him. I don't know who he is to assert that Christians who accept a particular idea only accept it insofar as they haven't thought about it. I mean, is this a general rule or is he universalizing here?
Contradictions in the Bible. Maybe they've Googled an awful lot of them and then just blithely accepted whatever apologetics they've come across.
Don't you, listen, sir, you're trying to accuse me of the Dunning-Krueger effect. I see what you're doing here, sir. You need to knock it off. I'm kidding, of course. Look, I mean, I think he has a pretty good point here. It seems like a wild kind of assertion that the Christians who don't agree with what he's putting across are that way because they are, victims of the Dunning-Krueger effect, or they haven't really properly thought it out. I don't know if that works in every case.
But very, very few people have actually critically interrogated the claimed contradictions in the Bible. And even those who have are not convinced that it is a fact that there are zero contradictions in the Bible. Because when you get into the nitty-gritty of the claimed contradictions, the data do not support the conclusion that these things don't contradict. Whether you're
You know what? In all seriousness, I really respect this guy's approach, and I think everything that he's saying is reasonable, if not valid. So you might say to me, okay, well, why are you a Christian then if you accept all of these contradictions? Well, I mean, contradictions are based on perspective. I believe, coming from a Hegelian tradition, that the contradictions are necessary for growth. There has to be a thesis, an antithesis, and then a synthesis. So the contradictions, as this library that is the Bible goes into development, just remind me of my own contradictions and my own perspective shifts as time changes. So those things don't bother someone like me. I'm not a fundamentalist.
you're talking about the contradictory accounts of Judas's death, or the contradictory accounts of how many animals Jesus was riding into Jerusalem, or the contradictory accounts of Jesus' birth, or the contradictory accounts of the creation of the universe.
I wonder if this makes the mistake of assuming that the biblical writers were correspondence theorists. I would love to have a conversation with this guy because he does seem really smart.
Or of Ahaziah's death, or of who it was who killed Goliath, the shaft of whose spear was like a weaver's beam, or any one of a number of other contradictions. When you actually get down into debating the nature of these contradictions, the people claiming they're not contradictions are always going to retreat to the notion that it's not impossible to harmonize the two different accounts. Notice that is a tacit admission that it is not the most likely explanation for the two different accounts. It's not saying the data demonstrate this is what's most likely. It's not even usually saying this is plausible. What it's most often doing is saying you can't prove it's impossible, therefore I have this tiny little sliver of not impossible, and that's where I'm going to be comfortable. Which is, again, a tacit admission that this is not the best explanation.
But why shouldn't one do that if their entire worldview rises or falls on that? I mean, atheists they tend to have this idea that truth is to be had regardless of how miserable the truth makes you. Right. And the thing is, look, I'm the person with the least dog in this fight because as a mystic, I am not, a lot of times my ideas are considered spooky from both sides. I mean, both the fundamentalist Christian and the atheist have something to say about why, my position is kind of sketchy. Right. But I think that puts me in a pretty healthy position to take on board ideas and to relinquish ideas because there's not really a large community for people like me anyway, which means I don't have a ton to lose by, exchanging bad ideas for good ones. At least I hope not. But at the same time, I don't necessarily think, let me hear this again.
It's where I'm going to be comfortable.
Right. Atheists criticize Christians for wanting to be comfortable. But why would you criticize that? Like, if we genuinely live in a universe in which there is no God, there is ultimately no hope, ultimately no meaning, then aren't stories just things that we tell in order to accomplish the very end that you're criticizing? Like, why should we relinquish that if indeed it is false? What would be the point of relinquishing something false which gives you that sense of hope? If the sense of hope is just this nice little thing you have and this temporary thing, I've never understood that critique.
Which is, again, a tacit admission that this is not the best explanation. So they're not convinced it's a fact. They're not convinced it's the best explanation or the most likely explanation. They're convinced it's not impossible. And when you say, I am convinced it's not impossible that the Bible has zero contradictions, you're not asserting something you know to be a fact. You're asserting a belief that it's not impossible that the Bible has zero contradictions. And that's a very different claim. But again, very few people are willing or able to be self-critical about what they mean when they assert on the internet that the Bible has zero contradictions.
Now, I think this was a very, very well done video. I will say that it applies to atheists as well. A lot of atheists, when theists talk about miracles, like the signature in the cell idea, where it's like, oh, we seem to be beautifully, wonderfully made. The universe seems as if it was designed. A lot of atheists who are uninformed, because there's uninformed people, in all worldviews. Not that atheism is a worldview. I digress. There are atheists who make this same mistake of saying, "Oh, well, there is some scientific explanation that we just don't know yet, right?" And as a matter of fact, they'll say "God of the gaps." Whenever you say, "Look, these things look like they're designed." I think it was even Francis Crick who elucidated the structure of the DNA molecule, said that biologists must constantly keep in mind that what they're seeing is not designed, but rather evolved. And so a lot of atheists kind of go into this. It was like, well, yeah, there's a sliver of a possibility that science will one day figure this out. And so I'm going to live in that pocket of possibility. It seems like Dan McClellan here is saying just the same thing about Christians, which could be said about the other side, which is that we have a worldview in which we feel comfortable, and that no matter how slender, no matter how skinny that possibility is, we want to sit inside that pocket. And, shouts out to him. I think that he's very, very well spoken and intelligent, and I want to interact with more of his videos.